Hello and welcome to the Overly Animated Podcast, where we take animation seriously. We provide fan-oriented and analytic discussions on a variety of animated shows, movies, and anime, currently featuring Steven Universe, Gravity Falls, Star Wars Rebels, Moonbeam City, RWBY, and Adventure Time. I'm Dylan Hysen, and today I'm joined by Delaney Stovall.
Hello.
Today, Delaney and I are discussing the latest episode of RWBY. It's Brawl in the Family. We will discuss that terrible title. Terrible title in a second. We discuss RWBY every Sunday afternoon here on the Overly Animated Podcast, and you can check out all our podcasts featuring regular coverage of the shows I mentioned in the beginning at overlyanimated.com. Coming up this week, we have many podcasts on Adventure Time. The Stakes miniseries is coming out in addition to our regular week-to-week coverage of certain shows. So let's get right into this latest episode of RWBY. It's Brawl in the Family. Okay, so first of all, this is like the worst title I've ever heard of. So
this is so bad.
I don't like, the pun doesn't even work. Why is it all in the family? I don't know. It's kind of a little bit,
I mean, I guess it's because we have like two family members, and like,
but the people that are fighting aren't related. Okay, you can. Yeah. Okay. What did you think?
Tried.
What did you think of It's Brawl in the Family, Delaney?
Like the episode or the title, we're gonna continue to bash.
Yeah. No, the episode.
I really liked the episode. I mean, at first I was like, okay, whatever, but I want to date Winter. Like, can I be Winter's girlfriend, please? And then the fight was awesome. It was pretty great. I enjoyed it. And it's also funny, like, how similar. It's very clear that Weiss wants to be everything Winter is. Like, they fight the same way. So I'm assuming Weiss is mirrored how she fights after Winter. But there is a distinct difference in how they fight. But also Uncle Crow is cool and a lot younger than I thought he'd be. Uncle Crow is not old.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to tell in the show who's what age because everyone looks the same.
They do. Seems like he's 30s, right?
I would think so. Yeah. And then I like him and RWBY's relationship. Also, I officially ship Weiss and RWBY. It happened in this episode. It's when Winter was like, "Thank you for taking an interest in
dude.
Yes. Oh man. Oh man.
Yes.
It happened right there. I was like, oh.
Good. You joined in the dark
I fell into the boat.
Okay.
It happened.
Briefly, I didn't get your thoughts on last week's because you weren't on that one. I was pretty critical of it on my podcast on last week's.
Critical of it. I liked it. I can't think of anything I had a problem with it about. I mean, the thing with Crow though, that was kind of annoying because it's who are you? And then you kind of don't care. I didn't really like how they handled that. The fights, I don't care about Neptune.
Yeah,
I don't
exactly.
care about boys.
Yeah.
But why do we have boys? I don't like Sun. We've had this discussion. I despise Sun.
I defended Sun on the podcast.
No,
but yeah, no. The problem with last week is that the Crow stuff was incredibly dumb and annoying, and the fights were mediocre. And they were about people we didn't care about. But this week, basically, I was very nervous because last week's episode was kind of bad, and this week's was a big improvement, and I think it did a lot right, and I'm very excited. What was that? Winter, yeah. Winter's okay. I don't know. It's a brief introduction. I think Crow stands out a little more.
Well, yeah.
Their characterization of him is kind of more concrete and stuff. Not that I don't. I'm not saying I prefer Crow. I don't know. He's the type of character I don't like. So
she's Weiss, on crack. And I don't mean crazy. I mean she's just more Weiss.
She's a colder version of Weiss. Yeah.
Yeah, it's she's more, and but it's interesting too because she clearly cares about her sister, and it's really funny. Is
that clear? I'm not sure.
I really like the part where it's I didn't ask you how you were doing. I asked how you were, and then she hit her. That was great. I liked that.
I don't know.
She asked how you been, and not I don't know. I enjoyed that. Are you eating enough? I think they do care about each other. I don't know. I really liked that part. That part made me happy.
That's an optimistic way to look at that scene. I think you've convinced me, but at the same time, she did hit her, so I was not very happy with that.
I have a little brother, and he has stitches for me, so these things happen, and I didn't do it on purpose, by the way. I didn't attack.
Well, as I am a younger sibling, so I was not happy with that. So maybe I'm relating to Weiss in that way. Yeah. Okay. So it's Brawl. This episode does like a ton great. There's a few things which I'm going to criticize pretty heavily, but made the major things that it does are the fight isn't a big improvement. This is probably the best fight scene we have so far. I don't think it's great, but it's fine. Um, the interaction, the best thing that this episode does is this show has been just kind of steadily improving throughout its run at its like humorous character to character dialogue. And this episode, I think, is a good example of how it's at a point where like it's not cringeworthy and that it's actually kind of funny at this point. Kind of RWBY and Weiss's exchanges in this episode are actually really funny and really well tuned to their characters.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, huge props to Lindsay Jones and Kara Eberl or Eberly, I don't know, who just nail RWBY and Weiss's dialogue, I think in a way that previous episodes of the show haven't stood out to me for their voice acting. I mean, all of the voice actors in the show, actually except for Crow, it looks like, are inner Rooster Teeth people who aren't actually voice actors, so a lot of times you kind of have some crappy voice acting, but Lindsay and Kara have just really stepped up and they really just nail the dialogue in this episode. The big scene at the end, we have a lot of exposition, and I think it's good that this show is kind of leading us to a direction where things make sense, although it's being very vague.
Yeah, I still don't understand what's going on.
No. There's a lot of they answer a little bit, and then they just introduce a lot of other elements. So
I mean they did, but like the thing is, they didn't like actually answer anything.
Okay, we'll talk. I mean, I watch these on Saturday, so I've like had a day to sit on this, read speculation. We'll get into what some of this means. And yeah, so I was overall happy with this episode, and I'm glad that the show isn't going to be terrible. So let's go with that. I'm still not. This is the third episode in a row with a fight scene. I don't know if we need a fight sequence every episode, but it looks like we're kind of going that way, because it looks like next episode has one too, right?
Yeah, we're in the festival, so like it's going to continue to happen.
Yeah, what's your take on this? Because even season 2 was very fight heavy. It still wasn't every week, especially in the first half.
Well, I mean, I don't think there's really a problem with it as long as like the fights like are either help move the plot. Like this fight in this episode kind of helped move the plot. Like this had a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Vital Festival, it's fine. I mean, I was right though. My theory has been proven that the games are rigged, and then, so I think it's more about it's just gonna have to be like a case by case basis. Like in general, it's not a problem. It just depends on like if the fights are high quality. I mean, if they're like terrible and they last like 3 minutes, like no thanks. But I mean, if they're good, if they're nice to watch, like if they're great, and then they like if they actually do something for the plot or they actually like serve a purpose, I don't think there's a problem with having a fight every episode. I mean, and of course we're literally in a plot device that traps us in having a fight every episode.
Yeah.
As long as they deliver good fights. I mean, obviously last week's. I mean, I don't think the fights last week were the worst. It was just like they were about characters you don't care about, so it's hard to care.
Okay, like, right. Okay, there's 3 problems with the fight scenes that they're doing, and you hit on all of them. Number 1, they involve characters that we don't care about. This episode continues that trend. Number 2, they don't forward the plot. This episode reverses that. Tournament fights don't matter. I don't care about them. Number 3 is they're not good, and that's to be expected given the production situation. However, they should probably know that and just not jump into a plot thing that involves a ton of fights when that's going to be the weak point now. And I don't expect us suddenly to get incredible fight sequences, although I do think this was an improvement, and I think the general reaction in the fandom has agreed with that assessment.
Well, hopefully, like we've gotten to a point that maybe we won't have to see a fight every episode, or we won't have to see all the tournament fights. Like maybe they'll just show like who's winning, and hopefully we'll get an episode where they just flash through the brackets.
Mm-hmm. I'm hoping we do not see the fight that was alluded to at the end of the episode, because I do not care about it. As much as I love Coco, Coco's like the best. I just don't need to see that fight.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that fight is Coco versus Emerald, which is like 2 of my faves. But yeah.
I mean, I think what's more interesting would be to like continue to watch as they rig the fights and then see how those play out. until we get to obviously the RWBY and then fight.
Here's a revolutionary idea. Let's focus on our main characters. This
know,
show
right?
refuses to do that. It is very frustrating.
Well, we have so many characters. It's getting to the point where like this is worse than Korra book 3. Well, I guess book 4.
Yeah,
So many freaking characters.
Korra just always focused on the main gang, though. That's the thing. Yeah. This show just doesn't seem to care about focusing on the main gang. Yeah, let's get into this episode. Can be broken down into 3 segments: the pre-fight, the fight, and then this exposition scene at the end. And to me, the strongest part of the episode are RWBY and Weiss's interactions with Crow and Winter in the beginning of the episode. So I think that to a lot of people, I guess, don't love Weiss. I mean, Weiss is my favorite character, so I don't really understand that. But
well, of course, a lot of people don't like Weiss. Her character model is the character model that people hate. Like that's
like
the thing.
The cold, person. Yeah.
So a lot of people don't like the character model.
So I think a lot of people are going to find her more sympathetic this episode than ever, right? Because she's not actually in a position of superiority, like in a social situation, as opposed to normal. This one, she's trying to be her sister's there, and she wants her to like her, and it's just very obvious that it's like she's not being cold for one; she's being very warm, and it's pretty sympathetic. Like, what do you think of this side of Weiss? Do you see this as a realistic extension of Weiss's character?
I mean, yes, and we've been seeing why. I mean, Weiss has. I don't want to say become less cold, because I really don't like that description of directed towards a woman at all. But
she puts on this front, and as she's gotten to know her teammates more, it has appeared less and less, for sure.
Yeah, no, she's definitely. We've seen more and more of Weiss, and clearly Weiss is that kind of person who needs to get to know you, and it's more of like, who can I be myself with? And that's very clear, and we've gotten that. And her and RWBY are biffles, we know this. And I think this is very realistic. And anyone who has siblings, it's hard for me to. I understand this dynamic, but I'm the older sibling myself, so I'm not a member of this dynamic in particular. But this is something people are used to. This is a thing. Obviously, you want your older sibling. I've had this with older cousins. This is very, very sympathetic, very realistic. And of course, Weiss above anyone else would act this way. And we've had hints of this too. We're talking about her family, and when she went and was messaging, and they were all very shocked she didn't want to talk to Winter. And
yeah, they've led up to this for sure.
And it's done very well, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I just think it's realistic. It's sympathetic. Most notably about these early scenes is kind of just you would expect. Okay, if I had to see how this situation would go, it's okay. Weiss is there trying to get Winter to be happy with her, and then RWBY's there too, and then Weiss is gonna be super mean to RWBY because she's disrupting what's going on. But what we actually see is Weiss just being pretty buddy with RWBY. That's kind of crazy. That this is kind of the most getting along that they've had, and it's at a time when Weiss would be in a position where Weiss is comfortable showing her affections towards RWBY in front of someone who she wants to appear sympathetic to. That's kind of crazy.
Well, I think Winter did ask. She's are you making friends? And I think that's part of it too, is that she's trying to live up to Winter's expectations.
There's that side of that too, yeah.
And then I don't know, it just, and also RWBY didn't speak a lot in this episode at all. There was very little dialogue from RWBY, and RWBY didn't even. RWBY babbled in this exchange, but there also wasn't anything she really did that would warrant Weiss being awful to her. Yes, if this was episode 1, Weiss should have been oh my god, you are the worst. But I don't know. I think this is a natural. This, I wasn't surprised watching this.
That's good. That means they've handled this progression well. I agree.
Which is interesting because the majority of this progression has been off screen.
Because they never show the main cast. Yeah. But yeah. it's been there to a certain extent. I mean, we've
No,
gotten
it's
these
been there,
great
but I'm saying
moments.
like the majority of it, like if you would just take the show at face value, they shouldn't be friends at this point. Or they
Right,
should be
yeah.
kind of friends, but they shouldn't be as close as they are. But we've had a lot of progression off screen because the 2 seasons so far have taken over like several chunks of time.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of time between seasons 1 and 2, which is like not
Yeah.
even obvious watching the show. Um, so yeah, I mean, just as a White Rose shipper, this is like great.
Well, now I
These
ship
interactions.
it. Oh my
You
god.
ship it now. Like we had so many
Okay.
Ruby's kind of like humorous, awkward dialogue is totally on point here. We have it's Winter saying Beacon. It's been a long time. The air feels different, and Ruby's like it. I mean, it is fall, so it's probably colder.
Autumn. I mean,
Yeah, that's great. Um, we have what was the other one she had? There was like the time that she pushes like the anime style bump that Weiss gets on the head back in,
yes.
and that was great. That was also totally she's like taking care of Weiss. Yes, okay. And then of course we had as you mentioned the I wish to thank you for taking an interest in my sister. Why did they phrase it like that on purpose, or is it just that was their version of the like noble dialogue in that case?
I
Like the
don't
proper.
know. I mean, my shipper heart says.
Yeah, I think that's just them trying to have like upper class dialogue, I guess. For Winter, which was a little awkward at times, but that's okay. Um, we had one of the problems that the show has in this episode specifically, and I'm going to be fairly critical of it when we discuss the last scene, is throwing exposition at us at unnatural places in the story. And we have the first example of this in the opening scene when Weiss is like, "Oh, Vale is so much different from Atlas. The school and government are separate," and then she's like, "I know this." So this is not something that makes sense for Weiss to say in this situation,
Yeah.
and it's kind of just for our benefit, I guess. This will be important later. I don't know if we even knew this or not yet, but yeah, this is not. It's not. It's
Well, I
not
mean, I
good.
don't. There's no way we like could have known this because it's such a weird detail.
Yeah,
Because like you wouldn't assume that that other
there,
places because we've only seen Vale. Like it's a really weird thing to
there's
say.
the show does a lot of exposition off screen as well with the World of Remnants. I don't remember them saying this in one of them.
I haven't watched. I
Yeah,
haven't
you
watched
should
them
watch
yet.
those and report back. But yeah, I don't remember them saying that. What else we have in this opening scene? We had at the end, Winter's like, "Take me to your quarters," and Weiss is like, "The bunk beds only look unstable," which I thought was one of the like best pieces of, again, another good example of the show improving on their kind of humorous dialogue with. Because like I was like, okay, they're going to their rooms. That's the first thing I think of when I think of their rooms is their awkward looking bunk beds, which are still
Yeah.
there. So I thought that was like well handled.
I thought it was. She's like bug beds.
Yeah. Okay, so briefly, okay, talking more about Winter. Winter's apparently an Atlas specialist. She's obviously in the
Yes.
Atlas military in some form.
She's wearing a uniform,
Yeah. And
surrounded by robots.
so she obviously has this some history with Crow, and to a certain extent, it feels weird that they care so much about fighting each other, and then later it seems like they're both small fish in the larger picture in the last scene.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's like, it was just weird all around. Like, I mean, I enjoyed it, but it was very strange. And honestly, like, what's his face, Ironwood. That's his name, right? Like, everything with him still makes very little sense, and
Yeah.
like, it's just so weird. And
We'll
to
talk
have
about it at the
him,
end.
like,
They give us more concrete information here than
Yeah.
before. I think they explain it pretty well. We'll talk about that. So yeah, and Crow is so he's obviously the belligerent drunk, like,
and I think Ruby mentioned before that he goes on missions.
yeah,
I think she meant like we knew he was on assignment. I think.
I guess, yeah. So Crow actually is voiced by an actual voice actor, which is pretty notable. So, and I think he does a pretty incredible job with this opening dialogue. And I guess they do a good. I naturally will hate this type of character, and I didn't hate Crow in this episode, so I think that means they did a good job with him. Briefly on, we have Crow is mad that Ironwood finally turned his back on Osmond. We'll talk about this later, but it's like Crow plus Crow is on Osmond's side, Winter's on Ironwood's side, basically. Their fight, let's briefly talk about it. Winter has these double rapiers. I don't know what the sword is called, the Weiss sword, and they like extend out. And then Crow has a RWBY type weapon, because remember that RWBY says she made her but it's a scythe slash gun. And what's notable about same as RWBY's, and what's notable about his is he has like this gears that like segment the scythe. It's really interesting.
It's really cool.
Yeah, during the fight we get RWBY and Weiss cheering for their different sides. And again, notable about Weiss is Weiss isn't just mad at RWBY. She's like, oh, I should also take on this rooting game. She's like, yeah. Before she's like, teach him respect, Winter, right? So it's obviously it's like you can tell like the uncertainty in how to approach stuff like this with Weiss. And again, no animosity towards RWBY, which is incredible.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. We don't need to talk about specifics on the fight. We both said it's good. It's not necessarily incredible, but
they were jumping on things and
jumping around and stuff. I've heard that this is still slower than a lot of Monty's fights, which I think is probably true. I think this show needs to kind of increase.
Yeah, I could actually follow this fight, like usually,
which I think is a bad thing.
Yeah, because like honestly, when I was watching because I marathoned it all like very recently, and like watching like the first fights like in season 1, it's like I don't even know what's going on right now. Like, especially when they're fighting like the giant bird in the forest. I'm like, what is this? I honestly can't comprehend what's going on.
Which is totally what's supposed to be happening. Like, it's great.
Yes, like it's supposed to be like a video game where I'm like, what's going on? I'm just hitting buttons.
Yeah.
But then like now I could actually follow this fight. And then it gets to the point when you actually follow it, and then if you kind of know what's going to happen next, you stop paying attention.
It just gets boring. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this was okay, but it was too slow. I think the fight speed needs to increase. The other thing that I briefly mentioned this before, but stop throwing two characters. This is a classic like thing that writers do on shows, and it's just incredibly annoying. Why are you going to make two new people fight against each other who we don't care about yet? Like, fights should be with people who we have a vested interest in. I don't care about Winter and I don't care about Crow. I know that we've heard about them on the show before, but you need to give the audience time to develop a rooted interest in them and not just instantly throw them at each other. I don't think that's a good plot decision.
I agree. Like, it's like, what does this serve? It serves no purpose. They just messed up the courtyard, which got fixed anyway. Like, there was no point.
Yeah, well, Glinda can magically fix anything, but yeah. We briefly have a Penny sighting, and then Penny and RWBY smile and wave at each other, which is incredible.
It was adorable.
Yeah. What do you think of Nuts and Bolts? You didn't ship that?
Maybe.
I love their interactions, yeah. Like I said, Glinda
and I still ship like Blake with everyone.
Blake and Yang not in this episode.
Sigh.
Sigh. Yep. No. I mean, I'm glad that my two favorites are here, but let's feature the main cast.
Yes, please.
As you mentioned, RWBY's and RWBY like going and clinging onto Crow is adorable.
Their interaction I enjoy. Like, I like their relationship thus far.
Yeah, that was really well done. Weiss to RWBY, and suddenly your recklessness makes sense. The great Weiss line.
I like that.
And then at the end, you're just mad because he whooped butt. And then Weiss again. And Weiss again, not hostile. It's like, that was a draw at best. Like, she's like just being petulant, not like animus. What's the noun form of that? Anyway, or the adjective form of that. Anyway, okay.
I don't think there's an adjective form.
Yeah. Okay, this ending scene. So the scene kind of has a turning point where it turns into throwing exposition at us in an unrealistic way, but we're not there yet at the beginning of the scene, so I still think it works.
It's when Winter leaves.
It's when Winter leaves, exactly. So the five of them, Winter, Crow, Glinda, Ozpin and Ironwood are in Ozpin's office. He's always drunk. Cut to Crow drinking. Interesting. I'm glad that they
It's funny.
explained that to us because it's not obvious that that's what's going on. I think before that, I don't know. Maybe it is, but we saw him
pretty
drinking
obvious.
We saw him drinking last episode.
No,
though, so.
it's pretty obvious that he's always drunk.
I forgot. I blocked out the dumb scenes of him from last week, so I didn't remember that. Been out of context for weeks. You sent me to get intel on our enemy, and I'm telling you, our enemy's here. We know. Okay, there you go. So that's kind of the big. That I don't know. That's like okay. So Crow. So what they're saying is Crow's been out. I think this all makes sense within the context of Crow. So you have to just understand what's happening plot wise within the show. I know that we don't know anything, so that them saying anything makes sense to us. But Crow is meeting with them. He's been out of the picture for a while. They're like catching up. So it makes sense that they would exchange details of what's happening now from both their perspectives. It doesn't make sense that they already state what's already known between them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's like what?
Yeah. So that's
and we already knew this.
Yeah. Communication's a two-way street. I think that I would naturally side with Crow on this. Why didn't they just tell him like he's just on some wild goose chase, right? If they already know that him being out there is but a reason to believe you've been compromised, and then they don't expand on that again, so that's great. And then
I guess they thought he was a traitor or something.
I don't know. And then Winter leaves. What do you think of Winter leaving?
Well, it's interesting because they've built Winter up. I mean, not a lot. We don't have a lot with Winter, but they built her up to be important, and then they just sent her away. No, you got into a fight. We will go talk on the ship, and we will ground you. Go away.
I think it's a bad decision because this episode's all about introducing Winter, and apparently she's not important enough to be in the inner circle, as they mentioned.
Yeah.
I think that their argument would be Winter. It doesn't make sense that Winter would be in the inner circle. Okay, fine, but you could just manipulate the plot to have her actually be there.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe from a character perspective, Crow isn't going to talk freely unless she's gone or something. But yeah,
I see. What I imagine happening at this point is that I don't trust Ironwood at all. So I'm assuming that we're gonna have some sort of Winter has to choose crap, or she only gets Ironwood's side, and then there's gonna be some revelation. Because I'm assuming that's what's gonna have to happen. Because if she's not in the meeting, she only knows what Ironwood tells her.
Yeah, you're right. So she's not getting the other side of this. Okay, let's talk about the everything that happens after now. So we're going to try to analyze this for plot. And I'm going to probably have to read off a lot, but we'll see. So first of all, we have this thing that makes no sense. Crow says, your little infiltrator's in just another pawn. They're the one responsible for Autumn's condition. And then Glinda's like, what? So we've no idea.
What is that?
We have no idea who Autumn is. So this makes no sense. Of note that this is we have 3 out of the 4 seasons accounted for now. We're just missing Spring as a character, and speculation on who Autumn is and what her condition is. There's nothing to speculate on.
She could what even?
How does Crow know that presumably they are talking about Cinder? How does Crow know that Cinder is responsible for Autumn's condition? How did he figure that out?
Did he Well, I mean, he's chasing them, isn't he? That was his job.
So there's a few things. Okay, so this is the first thing to mention in terms of Crow with relation to Cinder. Who Crow doesn't know who Cinder is, but he knows he's chasing someone, and he knows it's a her. Yeah. So Crow says okay. So asterisk, they could be talking about a big bad above Cinder. That's a possibility. But for now we're going to assume it's Cinder because that seems more likely.
Oh, if there's a larger big bad, it's going to get annoying real quick.
Yeah, I don't think the show is going down that route, but it is possible. When they have Cinder so readily available, they run the risk of her becoming not threatening enough. But at the same time, at least she seems like a legitimate opponent because she's been in the spotlight so much, right? It's like Ozai. It's like Ozai at the end of Avatar. It's like, okay, he's this guy we've never seen before, right? So it's not the most fulfilling thing. So okay, that's number one with relation to Crow and them responsible for Autumn's condition. Then later he says Let's find this line. He says, I've been out there and I've seen the things she's made, and let me tell you, they are fear. What does that mean?
Is she making things? Like, can she make things that are like grim?
The only thing that we've seen that might relate to this is just the like the train in the underground in the abandoned city at the end of last season. It's like they're making a plan to get Grimm into the city. That doesn't seem to make sense with this. We haven't seen what this line is referring to, I think.
Yeah, we don't. We haven't seen, like, we know nothing. Like, they continue to like say things and we're like, what?
Yeah, I mean, we're hitting on all the things that don't make sense. There are some things that make sense. And then the third thing in terms of Crow with relation to Cinder is at the end, we get a scene with Cinder and Mercury and Emerald, and they all seem very concerned that Crow is now here, and they know who he is, and they're like, okay, it's Crow. Because, like, in this meeting, Crow is obviously not one of the big forces. It's, it's Ozpin and it's Ironwood. But Cinder and gang seem more concerned with Crow than either of those two.
Well, I thought they were more concerned with Crow and Winter.
They're just talking about Crow, I believe.
Well, see, that's another thing we can't know for sure because they were both fighting.
They say the hair and like the stench of something, right? Like they're talking about Crow, yeah. So they could. Yeah, you're right. They don't really mention Cinder. They mention Winter, I think. So I'm not sure. That was my read on it. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, no, I do. I mean, they mentioned Crow directly, but like I think they also like. I think there's also a chance they could also be worried about Winter.
It's possible. So, but the big thing is that there's some history between Crow tracking Cinder down. I guess that seems like what we're talking about. It seems like Cinder's doing more than we knew of, unless this line is just a red herring, the fear line, and we also have someone who is Autumn, who has a connection to all of them, and she has a condition. So there you go. That is a surprise to Glinda and them, is that Cinder is responsible for Autumn's condition. Okay, so none of that makes sense right now. Let's talk about the stuff that does make sense. So here's the part where Crow monologues about things that it doesn't make sense that he would tell to the other people in the room. So he says, despite what the world thinks, we're not just teachers or generals or headmasters. The people in this room, the leaders of the other two academies, we're the ones that keep the world safe from the evils no one even knows about. It's why we meet behind closed doors. It's why you work in the shadows. Okay, so this is basically explaining a long-running question in the show, which is, why aren't the governing councils of all nations the ones who are opposing Cinder in this fight? Why is it these headmasters who are like the ones who seem to be running the show? I didn't realize
this was like a problem. I just assumed this was the thing.
The show, yeah, it's something that doesn't like it doesn't seem ludicrous until you think about it a lot.
Well, I mean, I didn't really. I don't know. I guess
the show just takes it for granted so often, but in reality, it's like, why aren't the actual governments handling this situation?
Well, I'm just so used to literally every plot that's like this. Like, the governments never do anything, so like at this point, I'm not even surprised.
Yeah, but what Crow is explaining here is that they have an inner circle. He mentions the word guardian later, and I'm not sure what that means, but it's seemingly they have
a hero. They want a hero. Like, it's going to be like RWBY. Like, we need a champion.
Yeah, I'm not convinced of that. That's kind of how they make it sound. On the other hand, there's like an interpretation of this scene in which they are the guardians. Like, that word makes sense in that they are protecting like the true forces. Like, they're the guardians of the world, even of the governing councils. But at the same time, this consists of who? This consists of two of the headmasters. He says the leaders of the other two academies. So isn't this just the four headmasters plus Crow plus Glinda? So this is who we're talking about here. Two people we don't know about plus the four people in the room at the time. That's an interesting inner sanctum. I'm not. But this to me explains a long running, kind of plot hole with the show. So I'm happy this is here. It doesn't make sense that he's saying it, but then he connects it to something you mentioned earlier. He says, so tell me, James, when you brought your army to Vale, did you think you were being discreet, or did you just not give a damn? He says, you're here because Ozpin wanted you. He invited you to our inner circle and opened your eyes to what's in front of us. So again, it's they're the ones who really know what's going on. Ozpin invited James into their group. And then James says, he explains he wanted the people of Vale to feel safe because they don't know that this inner circle is there, basically, right?
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you don't trust James. I think this episode makes it is trying to say that yes, Ironwood is for sure a good guy. He's just approaching things from a different angle. That's my read on this. Like he's in the good guy's inner circle. He, however, is opposing Ozpin in a way in which Ozpin doesn't like, but it's just them having differing philosophies on how to handle this situation.
I mean, sure, but I still don't trust him.
Yeah. I mean, I think it seems very unlikely that he'd be working with Cinder. Maybe, I mean, he's opposing.
No, I'm not saying necessarily that he works with Cinder, but like when it's going to come down to it, he's going to mess everything up.
He could totally mess things up for sure. Like that's kind of what they seem to be suggesting here. Later, Ozpin says, "If this is the size of our defenses, what is it we're expecting to fight?" Yeah.
Also, about the talking about inviting Ironwood into the inner circle. So they talked about so the government is separate from the schools in Vale, so that it implies that it's not like that elsewhere. So of course they have to keep it secret because apparently, and of course Ironwood is like in charge of the army. So like if he is the headmaster of a school, he apparently like reports to the government. So I guess that's why this is important. Why it has to be secret? They're purposefully keeping it secret from the government.
Vale is different from Atlas and that the school or government are separate. No, I think that it's saying, so from that line, I guess, Ironwood's from Atlas and Ironwood is also the head of government there, right? That's what Weiss is saying?
Maybe, I don't know. It could be either way. That's the thing, we don't know.
No, Weiss says Vale is different from Atlas and that the school and government are separate. I think that's what that means. I mean, we never see this for sure, I guess, but it makes sense that because Ironwood is the commander of is the commander of the military and is also the headmaster, so that's what she's saying. So yeah, that's further proof that this inner sanctum is not necessarily related to the governments because Ironwood had to be brought in. So then we have the thing with the Guardian. So in response to, and let me tell you there, Fear, Ozpin says, and fear will bring the grim. A guardian is a symbol of comfort, but an army is a symbol of conflict. ... And he says at the end, I suggest we find our guardian. So there's two contradicting lines here. He says a guardian is a symbol of comfort, but an army is a symbol of conflict. That suggests that they are the guardians, and an army is contradicting their mission. But then at the end, he says, "I suggest we find our guardian."
They're not the guardians.
Because he says he suggests we find our guardian. What is so like? How do you reconcile these two statements? Because I think they oppose each other.
I don't think they oppose each other because I've never once thought that they were the guardians.
Well, okay, you don't. This is the first time they mention the word guardian here, so this is not something that we knew about.
Clearly, they're obviously building up to like RWBY being the guardian. Like that's how this has to work. Like that's how a show like this works. Like they're gonna find a champion, and I don't know if it's gonna be out of the Vital Festival or.
Okay, interesting. So you're saying, so a guardian is a symbol,
sort of event, or they're just gonna pick somebody, but they're gonna choose someone to put all of their. It's no different than like obviously we're gearing up for a giant war. They have to find their Achilles.
So if you look at the statement in the context of the tournaments, a guardian is a symbol of comfort, but an army is a symbol of conflict. Then you can say, okay, so the guardian is whoever wins the tournament, but the army is also there, and that's a sign of conflict. So that explains that. That explains kind of this dichotomy line. And then I suggest we find our guardian. So I guess the leading theory you're saying is that whoever wins the singles portion of the tournament, I guess?
Not necessarily. Like, I'm not, like, that. I don't want that to be it, but, like, these are the possibilities. Like, it's the winner of the tournament. They just pick somebody, or, like, there's some sort of test, or, like, something happens, and they're like, there is our champion. If that makes sense. Like something terrible happens and someone steps up.
You just really want this to be the Goblet of Fire, basically, is what you're saying.
I'm just telling you, like, this is how these things work.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, the problem is this is being so vague. I think it's I think we can't conclude too much right now.
Well, they're being super obvious about it, though, at the same time. Like, we have to find our guardian. Like, oh my god, and we're watching the show, and the main character is RWBY. I wonder who the guardian's going to be.
Yeah.
Like,
if this is what this line ultimately alludes to, then I think the scene is even worsely constructed than previously, because
And I certainly hope it's not this obvious, but like they're not exactly settled.
In the context of this episode, and obviously isn't this the obviousness isn't the problem for me. It's like they're talking about this inner circle, and then they instantly transition to this guardian thing. So I'm a little worried about this how this thing is constructed. Anyway, you can give us your opinion on this. Maybe I was too set on this, trying to figure out what their inner circle thing is called. I think that's true. That I was too set on that.
You're like really fixated on like, I don't know, like you're fixated on things to me that have already been obvious to me that like I didn't need to have pointed out. Like I didn't need to have it. Like, I didn't need to have dialogue to be like, okay, if that makes sense. Like that was the thing that I needed to have for me to like be satisfied. Yeah. So I think we're fixated on different.
The show always took it as it's interesting because the show always took it as a given, so introducing an explanation to it kind of points out the flaw, right? You could have just taken it as a given before that too. One thing I want to emphasize here is that when you give us exposition that doesn't make sense in the context of the story, I feel like you could argue that, okay, it doesn't matter because the first time you watch this, it doesn't really matter. You're going to be just focused on the new information. I think that when Miles and Carrie do this, that they're selling themselves in the show short. I think that a higher quality show does not do this and does not do this type of bad expositional type of thing. And that I think that they can do
bad exposition. They never tell us anything ever. And so when they do things like this, it's really awkward and weird because we never know anything anyway.
This is a separate problem. They're being too vague with their stuff. I mean, in terms of unrealistic dialogue in terms of the actual plot situation. I think that this is something that a higher quality show will avoid, and I think that they should not just assume that they're just this internet show. I think that they need to kind of step up their expectations, I think. So do you think, since there's so much vague here in this scene, do you think this is like a negative?
I mean, it's really hard to it's a negative. This is a negative with the whole show. This has always been a problem. Like, it's always been like this, where it's like, we don't know anything, and they tell us something, and it feels really weird and clunky because the dialogue's awkward. And then you're like, what did they even tell us? And then, like, you move on, and then things kind of sort of make sense. I mean, honestly, we still don't know it. We still don't know anything. Like, we don't know anything really concrete. We know, like, very, very, very few details. And at this point, I'm okay with that. Like, I'm fine. Because it doesn't really matter at this point right now, because nothing's happening. Like, we have Cinder doing things in the background. She's raiding the tournament, but, like, I don't know. It's really hard to, like, feel a certain way about things going on because we don't know anything. And then, like, we don't, like, okay, I'm supposed to be scared, but I don't know what's going on. Like, it's a really weird limbo. And I think it is a negative, but, like, it's also been like this the whole time. So this isn't anything new.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's probably more than normal with this episode, but
with this episode, because they're trying to tell us things, but they don't actually tell us. For me, anyway, they didn't tell me any new information that I felt was like actually important, because like they said things, but they were either things I had already inferred or things that were already like obvious, but they hadn't like said it, if that makes sense. So like to me, it was a lot of, we're going to say these things out loud that everyone already knows, and it's like, okay, that's not helpful. And then granted, they also told us really vague things that like don't make sense, like autumn, and like, so it's like we didn't actually get anything out of the scene except the guardian thing, which, like, okay, I guess we're going in this weird direction.
They're introducing too many unknown variables. I agree. Yes. I think it makes sense that you would take this position. I would take the opposite, because I'm very much I'm always like, okay, you need to explicitly tell me things in the show. So I think it makes sense that I would be happy that they explicitly say this inner circle thing. Then it's
kind of annoying. I'm like. It's at this point, if they had said it like, I don't know, like last season, or like, you know what I mean? Like, to say it at this point, I'm like, are you serious? Like, I'm wanting actual information. You tell me this.
I would also, I do want to I do think it's not just me wanting things concretely stated. I think I would disagree with you. I do think that this is not something that is completely inferred. Like, I think you could infer it, but I think that it's not something that everyone
and that's fine. But I also think that it can also be stated in a way that's like it's like with Gravity Falls sometimes. Like, don't present things in a way that make them seem super, super important when they're not. Like, don't use a scene like this to not tell us anything.
At the very least, it's new information that Crow is in this inner circle, and that Ironwood was pulled in by Ozpin.
That's fine.
Let's talk about this last scene for a second. Because here I think we get, our typical villain scene at the end of the episode. Stay the course, he says. Cinder says the rest of the heavy lifting is being taken care of thanks to our clever little friend. And then we see the Queen hack program from midway through season 2 come back for the first time, right? And so
you saw it on his phone, right?
Did we?
Yes, we did. Did you miss this?
I mean, did we see the Queen there?
Yes, like when he goes to pick up his phone, you see the symbol, and then he takes his phone.
Yeah. Okay. At the end. Yeah. So and then it transitions right into it. Yeah. So I think they actually do a good job here, like explaining what they're trying to say without actually saying it, which the show struggles with sometimes. In that. They're implying that Cinder has access to everything at Beacon computer-wise, and that once Ironwood places his phone on like the hologram projector, then she now has access to his phone as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So props to the show for clearly stating that. I don't think that often happens. So I also think that's just pretty eloquent expositioning with not telling us specific things. So apparently this is a thing. It was kind of weird that they did this for the first time since like a season and a half, but interesting.
Yes.
And apparently Cinder has control over the tournament matches, which we didn't know.
She can just do whatever she wants.
Yeah, because it makes sense if she's control over all the computers in Beacon. And she picks Emerald and Mercury to fight Coco and Yatsuashi, who's one of the guys on Coco and Velvet's team.
And we know they've been keeping stats, so I guess they're rigging the tournament so that it turns out a certain way.
Yeah, we don't know what they're rigging it for, but this makes sense with what they're doing. And it's interesting that they would pick Coco as Emerald and Mercury's opponent, because Coco is one of the best fighters that we know of. So that's interesting. Does she want Emerald and Mercury to lose, or does she think that they have an advantage because they know her powers and stuff like that? We will see.
Well, it's interesting too because this was last week, but apparently, like, obviously semblances are not well known, because they were talking and they were like, "Oh, her semblance," and then she just like, why can't Nora just like blew everyone away? So I guess it is a distinct advantage to know people's semblances because they're clearly like not well known.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that their main advantage is figuring out the semblances. Yeah.
Which we still don't know 100% things on, but clearly they're like special abilities.
Yeah, it's a personal thing, so it wouldn't be public info, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. Overall, very interesting episode. A lot of negatives that we focused on, kind of, but I also think this was I'm now excited for the show again. So yay, thumbs up. I think the best of the 3 episodes this season.
Maybe. I did like the first episode.
First one was also good, but I saw the first one more of as average, and this one was like actively good. Okay. Next week, I don't know for sure because the Rooster Teeth does not communicate well with its audience, much like it's an internet site mimicking networks, which cannot communicate well. But I have heard that it might be a World of Remnant and not a new episode. But I'll try to confirm this. If you would like, you can check on our next episode page on overlyanimated.com, where I try to update with information the soonest I hear. But it might not be new, the show. So yeah, thanks for listening, guys. I'm Dylan Hysen. That's Delaney Stovall. You can find out all information at overlyanimated.com. You can support us at patreon.com/overlyanimated. Thanks to our current patrons, Shannon, Mitch Cordell, Beatrice, Nate, Andy, and Jamie, aka Hannah Fever, Mitch Cordell University, Beatrix, Strange, Buzz Lightyear, and Mailman. So like I said, maybe RWBY not new next week. We got Adventure Time coming up all of this week. We got our Star Wars Rebels and Premium City coverage on Wednesday, and we will see you guys next time. Thanks for listening. Bye.